CNN's Jake Tapper did an impassioned segment here. He went after Hollywood, the NBA, billionaires, and business people who are doing blood money deals with China. Let's take a look and then I'll react.
The allegations against the Chinese government go far beyond its treatment of Shui. This year, both the Trump and Biden administrations have asserted that China is committing, quote, genocide and crimes against humanity against more than 1 million Uyghurs, ethnic Kazakhs, Hui, other Muslims, some Christians, in internment camps or converted detention facilities, according to the U.S. State Department. Chinese authorities are forcing some women in these camps to take unknown drugs and injections. They're forcibly implanting IUDs, coercing them to get abortions and surgical sterilizations, according to former detainees. Beijing, of course, denies these charges. In fact, it's possible that you are about to purchase or receive a Christmas present made, at least in part, by Uyghur forced labor in Xinjiang province. Bipartisan legislation being debated right now in Congress would help prevent that if it passes. Right now, it's unclear that the House and Senate Democrats have a plan to get that legislation to President Biden's desk, with the Washington Post reporting that the Biden State Department is seeking to water down this legislation.
We know that for a time, Apple and Nike, a lot of big companies are pushing against it. They're not going to admit it. Who's going to go out lobbying in favor of slave labor? But this is their bottom line.
Of course, Apple and Nike publicly claim to decry slave labor. But to be clear, the behavior we are seeing from U.S. corporations is not about a company surviving. It's about discontent with just hundreds of millions of dollars, desiring instead billions of dollars. And those riches, they create blinders so that you get comments like this one about the Chinese government this past week from billionaire hedge fund manager Ray Dalio.
Now, as a top-down country, what they're doing is that it's that kind of like a strict parent. They behave like a strict parent, and they go through that. That is their approach. We have our approach.
A strict parent, just like, Casey Anthony. Even companies that here in the U.S. pride themselves on progressive values will whitewash for gold. For a Chinese release, Marvel Studios' Doctor Strange turned a major Tibetan character into a Celtic one, reportedly for fear of offending China. Here's Tom Cruise's iconic bomber jacket in Top Gun from 1986, which includes a flag of Taiwan patch. And here's Paramount's replacement patch, decidedly not Taiwan, for next year's sequel. Here's Disney in the credits for Mulan, thanking the publicity department of the Chinese Communist Party in Xinjiang, where the cultural genocide is happening. Disney, of course, bought the rights to The Simpsons for its streaming service. And this last week, we learned that this 2005 episode, which shows The Simpsons in Beijing's Tiananmen Square, the site of a brutal crackdown on pro-democracy protesters, a sign reads in The Simpsons episode, "On this site in 1989, nothing happened." And that episode, that's not available for Disney Plus subscribers in Hong Kong. Disney has not responded to requests for comment. That Simpsons episode in Hong Kong disappeared like Peng Shuai, disappeared like citizen journalist Zhang Zhan, whom the Chinese government has locked up for telling the truth about COVID-19, disappeared like the consciences of the millionaires and billionaires in Hollywood and the NBA and the IOC and Wall Street, who are all so eager for Chinese cash. They are pretending none of this is happening. There is no amount of money that can buy enough soap to wash that blood off their hands.
This is, I believe, the first time that Jake Tapper has ever gone after millionaires, billionaires, and Wall Street. He said all those things in that clip. So let's break this down. The Peng Shuai thing is nuts. You have this Chinese tennis star who accused a top Chinese government official of, I don't know if it was sexual harassment or sexual assault. It was some sort of Me Too allegation. And it was this long post that she put on the Chinese version of Twitter. Within 30 minutes, that was pulled down. And then she disappeared. Now, since then, there's been a couple pictures that were released of her giving an interview to the Olympic Committee, or of her giving a video interview to the Olympic Committee. They didn't release the video, but they released a picture of her giving it. There was also her at a restaurant that was a Chinese state-owned restaurant. There was this cryptic post that was released where she was like, "I'm okay, and if I get to play again, I would like to bring honor to my Chinese homeland," or something to that effect. A very suspicious post. So, she made a very serious allegation against a top Chinese government official, and then she basically disappeared. And so women's tennis cut ties with China and cut off all their tournaments there, unless and until she shows up and there's a reasonable explanation and all that stuff. But they appear to be the only ones who are taking any sort of stand. And what Jake Tapper's doing here is listing off the ways in which Hollywood and the NBA and U.S. business has really kowtowed to China. They're changing movies and TV shows and social media companies, and it's really not okay. I wouldn't bend the rules for any country. I wouldn't change episodes or change movies or change terms of service or be more authoritarian, restrict free speech even more to accommodate any foreign government. I'd say, look, the deal is what it is. If we're going to do business in your country, this is how our business functions, and because these are the values that we believe in, and that's that. Obviously, you have, money-hungry corporate losers who care more about the bottom line than they do about any ethical, moral code, and more, they care more about the money than the values, and so they don't do that. Now, another issue here is outsourcing. So, maybe not necessarily with the industries he's specifically calling out, but Jake, we've had U.S. businesses doing business with China for a long time now, for decades. We had permanent normal trade relations with China, was probably the worst trade deal, even worse than NAFTA, because it totally gutted American manufacturing and outsourced like all the jobs, millions. And so, that was the original sin, is permanent normal trade relations with China. I never would have done that. As you guys know, I say this all the time, anything that we can make in America, we should make in America. I'm totally fine with free trade and trading out of necessity for things we need, but anything that can be made here should be made here. And the way you address that is to change the nature of the trade deals and basically disincentivize outsourcing through taxes and through policy. So what you do is you say, look, if you outsource the jobs, I guess we can't stop you, but we're going to slap a tariff on your goods when they get back in the country, which makes the goods even more expensive for you if you make your goods overseas with cheap Chinese labor. So, in other words, you are going to incentivize people to create the jobs in the U.S. Look, protectionism gets a bad rap. It's this dirty word in U.S. politics, but I don't know why. Would you want to protect your family? Would you want to protect your neighbor? Would you want to protect your community? Of course. So why is protectionism? It's got a negative connotation to it, but no. And by the way, they put the smiley face on free trade. Oh, we're just doing free trade. Well, who's against freedom? What are you, crazy? Well, no. Another way of describing that is outsourcing. So I would totally rip up that trade deal and come up with a new deal that incentivizes U.S. jobs staying here. And I would craft rules and regulations to make it so that these companies that want to do business in China, they have to abide by certain values, including an adherence to free speech and things of that nature. So I have no problem with that. Look, I have no problem with Jake Tapper doing this segment. The part that I can't get over is the colossal hypocrisy of him, because all of a sudden he's moral and righteous and on his soapbox. Jake Tapper has said nothing about the multi-billion-dollar subsidies we give Israel every year. They have free healthcare and we don't, but we give them billions of dollars every year. He said nothing about our business dealings with them. And there are companies that make shit in occupied Palestinian territory, and they, the goods get sent here. He doesn't want to boycott those goods. He doesn't morally grandstand about that. He's got nothing to say about that. And by the way, the BDS movement says, hey, in illegally occupied Palestinian territory, we're going to boycott those goods because those businesses shouldn't be there because that's Palestinian territory. He's got nothing to say about that. He's got nothing to say about the fact that we arm 73% of the world's dictatorships. He's acting like, oh, look at this. We got all these business dealings with this terrible dictatorship and authoritarian country. We give weapons to 73% of the world's dictatorships, and he's got nothing to say about any of them. He's got nothing to say about Saudi Arabia and our close relationship with them. He's got nothing to say about Israel and our close relationship to them. The problem is how selective he is in his moral outrage. That's the problem. It's only, notice, this is important, it's only when it's the official U.S. enemy baddie states that he's got something to say, and he hops right up on that soapbox. That's the problem. So look, I got no issue with this segment other than you better craft one on Israel and our close economic ties with them and political ties with them. They're an apartheid government. They're doing illegal occupation. They're doing a slow-moving ethnic cleansing. Better craft that segment. Better craft the segment about our unholy alliance with Saudi Arabia. We just gave a country that's doing a genocide in Yemen $650 million more in weapons that are defensive in nature. Total bullshit. Not defensive at all. You know, over 200,000 people are dead in Yemen from famine and lack of medicine because of a blockade from Saudi Arabia that we're helping back, and the military weapons that we give Saudi Arabia that they use to bomb babies and mosques and schools and open-air markets. I want you to craft your segment on Saudi Arabia, on Israel, and, while you're at it, on the 73% of the world's dictatorships that we militarily arm. So, in other words, the moral grandstanding needs to be objective. And needs to not only be targeted at the official U.S. enemy baddie states. Because then, what are you doing effectively? You're just carrying water for U.S. propaganda, is what it is. That's what you're doing. So there is more tension between the U.S. government and China than there is between U.S. businesses and China. For sure. And so he's going after the businesses, Hollywood, NBA, the various businesses. Fair enough. But the real target is the U.S. government, because the U.S. government creates the policies that then leads to the businesses doing what they're doing. So you want to change this? Change the policies. Change the policies. You know? So go after the government. Tell them to rip up permanent normal trade relations with China. Tell them to craft a new piece of legislation that demands that these social media companies abide by free speech and they don't censor for authoritarian governments. By the way, they never would do that because we like to, this country likes to not allow free speech. I mean, for the love of God, they just suspended on Twitter an account that was tracking the Ghislaine Maxwell trial and the Epstein stuff. They just suspended it on Twitter. Well, so we don't even believe in free speech. And by the way, we just covered a story on the show the other day. This isn't a flippant point. This is very serious. In South Georgia, they uncovered a fucking slavery ring, a forced labor ring, using a specific kind of visa that gives employers all control over the employees. They had electric fencing around it, people staying in places that had terrible plumbing, very little clean food and clean water. They were doing forced labor, effectively. So, you know, look, again, I have no problem with this segment, but in context, he only does it when it's official U.S. enemy baddie states. He's got nothing to say about it when it's our allies, and he's got nothing to say about it when it's us. So, the sanctimonious tone is unearned for that exact reason, because he's a hypocrite. He doesn't do this objectively. He doesn't talk about all the various human rights offenders and authoritarian governments and our cozy relationship with them. But yes, having said that, fucking free Peng Shuai. Stop altering these movies and these shows just to get access to Chinese markets and Chinese money, and change the nature of these outsourcing deals, for sure. Bring back U.S. manufacturing. I mean, if anything that this pandemic should show us, it's that we can't rely on foreign governments, especially in times of crisis. We're waiting on PPE. Like, we should be making everything that we can make here, we should make here. And we'd be much richer and much better off for it, and a lot more people would have good paying jobs.